the geeky side of dogs, part 2. I hope you enjoyed part 1. There was a lot of information given in there about what can impact dogs, how they learn, their training, genetics as well, which is a huge part of dogs. And this is, again, more about how they learn, so in another way. I haven't got any comments coming up, which is just concerning me slightly, so I just want to make sure someone say hello to me. Just give me a wave or say hi, hello, something, so that I know I can see them. Otherwise I'm not going to be able to answer any questions that come up. Bear with me a second whilst I figure it out. Like I say, technology, not my thing. Not my thing at all. Dogs, yes. Technology, no. Right, I'll come off this one on my laptop and come back on again and see if that helps. Usually does. Okay, see, thank you, Alison. I've got something come up there from you. Okay, disappeared then. I think I popped off a minute. Bear with me just 1 second, everybody, whilst I sort out my technical issue. If I click on that one, that might well work. There you are. There we go. I can see you. Thanks, Alison. Right, let's bring that up. Let's bring that up on my thing, and then hopefully you should be popping up there on the right. There we are. Thanks, Alison. Hello. Right, so let's get rolling with the part 2 of the geeky side of the way dogs learn. So I've got lots and lots of notes, as I did last time. Loads, but I won't read them all out to you, but I'll make sure that I hit every point. So, as I did last week, I will spend about 10 minutes talking about each topic. It could take weeks to kind of delve into each topic fully and thoroughly, so that that you learn all about each thing. There's so much to learn about each part of this, but I just wanted to give a little touch on it. So just a bit of information to get the ball rolling, really, and get you thinking about it. I can hear Moose barking in the other room. He's going to be very vocal today, I can sense it. So, first of all, the way in which dogs learn. So there are 2 ways, there are 2 very known ways in which dogs learn, and that is classical conditioning and operant conditioning. So you may have heard of these. Hi Claire, thanks for joining. You may have heard of either of these. If you have, then just drop it in the comments that you've heard about these ways of learning already. So classical conditioning was founded by Ivan Pavlov, who is a Russian scientist, and he kind of discovered classical conditioning as a way of dogs learning. And then there is operant conditioning, which is was kind of discovered by B.F. Skinner, and he's another scientist who found that dogs can learn through consequences to voluntary behaviour. So the 2 ways in which they learn. So the classical conditioning is very much involuntary. There's no choice within it. It happens on a kind of internal basis. So it's a subconscious thing. Like, dogs aren't really aware of it, should I say. So they're not really aware that it happens, but they do learn like that. And whereas with B.F. Skinner's operant conditioning, they have a choice. So it's to do with their behaviour that they do, that they show. So a choice behaviour, and then there is consequence added to that. So every single dog training and behaviour course that I've ever done and that I've ever known of go into operant conditioning and classical conditioning over and over and over again. There's so many different examples of it, and there's so much information out there about it, but it is very, very lengthy. And which is good, because it's the main way in which dogs learn. So there's no disputing it. This is how dogs do learn. And I know a lot of people say, punishment doesn't work or reinforcement doesn't work. No, it does. It very much does. Both do. But as I'll explain to you, it depends a lot on how they're used and how the dog learns. So there's been lots and lots and lots of scientific studies done over the years, as I'm sure you're aware. None of them particularly nice, or something that we really want to be repeating. But they have given us a lot of information. So the information that we've been given has allowed us to learn more about other animals and the way that things impact them and the way that they learn and can understand things. So first of all, if we do classical conditioning first. So this is Russian scientist Ivan Pavlov. His most famous study was, you may be familiar with it, was to do with a bell, a dog, and, well, a lot of dogs, a bell and salivation and food. Hi Vicky, nice to have you here. So it's learning through association, completely involuntary learning. Everything is completely involuntary about it. Happens unconsciously. It's not something that they're sort of aware that they can do or can control. And it is a basic form of learning. So I keep looking here because I've got my notes here and I want to make sure I get it in the right order for you. So classical conditioning is two stimulus paired together. That's what it is. So they're unrelated initially, two unrelated stimulus, and they're paired together in order to create a response. So it's a learned response is what is created. So what he did, he had his dogs in the lab, and he had a bell, and he rang the bell and then fed the dogs, and rang the bell and then fed the dogs. And over time, what this created is when the dogs heard the bell, they would start drooling and salivating in the anticipation of food. So that meant that there was a neutral stimulus, which is your bell. So it means nothing to the dog. If you showed it to a dog, it means nothing to them. So it's completely neutral. And then there is the food, which is an unconditioned response. So there's nothing trained with it. It's just food. It's just there. And when the bell and the food are paired together, you get this response of drooling and salivating. So it's amazing because it means that we can pair one thing with another and create a response. So that is what is learned through classical conditioning, and that's what classical conditioning is. So when dogs drool, what actually happens is they relax, their mouth completely relaxes, their jaw does, they start salivating, again very involuntary. It just kind of pours from their mouth. It's not often something they choose to do. So that means that by pairing something with food at the right time, you can create a dog who gets more relaxed. You can get a very relaxed response about it because the muscles relax and then they start to drool everywhere. So it's that is a very, very common way of working with behaviour, is just standard classical conditioning. It's the pairing of seeing something either that they're not keen on or something that they have no association with or no kind of existing thoughts about, and pairing it with food, and then that can create a relaxed and happy sort of response to it. So I hope that makes sense. That's the classical conditioning. That's your Ivan Pavlov, so you can look him up. I've got things that I am going to share in the group afterwards about each thing I'm talking about today, because there's lots of examples which I think are quite helpful. So the second way of learning is the operant conditioning. Now operant conditioning, there's four parts to operant conditioning, and I've got my sexy whiteboard, so I'm going to show you that, talk you through it with my whiteboard. This may come backwards to you guys because I believe it's mirror imaged, but you don't really need to read it. I can read it out to you as I'm doing it. So operant conditioning is associating voluntary behaviour with a consequence. So you're applying a consequence to a behaviour the dog chooses to give you. So what that is positive reinforcement, negative reinforcement, positive punishment and negative punishment. Now when you're talking in the world of operant conditioning, positive does not mean a good thing and negative does not mean a bad thing. So positive means adding and negative means taking away. Reinforcement means more likely to happen again, so the behaviour is more likely to happen again, and punishment means the behaviour is less likely to happen again. So if I draw this out for you, so I'm just going to draw a very wiggly grid. So just standard grid, crisscross. And what you've got is plus R. So plus R, positive reinforcement. And then minus R, negative reinforcement. Plus P, positive punishment, so adding punishment. And minus P is negative punishment, so taking away punishment. So automatically in our minds, punishment is a horrible thing and reinforcement is a good thing. But in the land of operant conditioning, that is not truth either. So Reinforcement means it will happen more often, or the dog is more likely to do it more often, and punishment means they're less likely to do it. Is that making sense? I hope that's landing there. So let's have a look. I've got some examples written down to try and help explain them as well. So positive reinforcement, a lot of you will be familiar with that. That is often the way that my methods are. So positive reinforcement here, that means adding to increase behaviour. So, oh, hang about, let me see. Oh, I can see it, thanks Claire. Right, so the dog sits and then the dog gets given a treat. This means you've added reinforcement to make the behaviour more likely to happen in the future. So you added something when a behaviour was shown and it makes it more likely to happen. So that's the world that a lot of positive reinforcement dog trainers live in. This is where we live. We add a reinforcement to make it happen more often and more likely to happen. Positive punishment. So where are we? Here. Positive punishment. Adding a punishment. So this is the adding of something to make the behaviour less likely to happen. An example would be the dog jumps up and you knee the dog in the chest. The dog is less likely to jump again because you've added something that is punishing to make the behaviour less likely to happen. Okay? So, I'm not saying it's particularly nice, by the way, but these are just examples. So, negative reinforcement. So, this one. Negative is taking away, reinforcement is here. So, negative reinforcement. If the dog is lying down and we want the dog to sit up, pull the lead continuously until the dog sits up. When the dog sits up, the lead is then relaxed and the tight collar goes away. So what the dog learns is that the pulling of the lead is taken away when I sit up from a down, and that means it's more likely to happen. So the dog is much more likely to sit up quicker because it's uncomfortable when it can't move. So the taking away is we take away the tension on the lead when the dog does what we want. So do you see how reinforcement is not necessarily a good thing? The taking away can mean taking away something negative when something happens. But try and stick with what I've written down so I don't confuse myself. Negative punishment could be when the dog jumps up, the person steps away or moves away, and the dog jumping up made the attention that they were giving them go away, which means the dog's less likely to jump in the future. So that means something is taken away to make the behaviour less likely to happen. So where I live in dog training world, predominantly here, positive reinforcement. I add things in order to see the behaviour increase. So the behaviour is more likely to happen because I'm adding positive things when the dog does as I like. I also live over here, which is, I'm just going to make sure I get this right. Because in this example, if I'm fussing a dog and they jump up at me, I will remove my hands or I will take a step back. So that is taking away something in order to see that behaviour less likely to happen. Does that make sense? So this is the operant conditioning, the 4 quadrants of learning. Now there's many, many, many examples of this, and with humans you could use this as well. It really, some of them are quite fine line between which ones they are, and it can be quite difficult to know. But generally speaking, this is where I will try to be at. This is what I will do if things kind of appear that I'm not so keen on. So to see how a punishment is not necessarily horrendous, whereas reinforcement can be quite horrendous, and adding punishment generally not very nice. So it's impossible to be 100% purely positive, because if you take, for example, if a dog is enjoying a training session with you, with food or with toys or with attention or whatever it may be, and then you stop that training session, that is punishing to the dog. So you can't be 100% purely positive, because in your training it has to come to an end at some point, which can be punishing to dogs. So it's not really possible. But you can certainly try. You know, we can aim to be as positive as possible, you know, in what we do. And therefore the dogs are more likely to see the behaviour show the behaviour we want them to see. So there's no point in saying punishment doesn't work, because it does. And there's no point in saying that reward-based training or reinforcement-based training doesn't work, because it does. It's the way dogs learn. So it's not whether or not you believe in it, it does work. An example that I like to give to people is why I'm not a fan of using punishment-based training. So I'm not judging anything anyone does within the group or otherwise, but I'm just putting out there my example of it. So one of the reasons I'm not so keen on it is because it doesn't address the reason why. And to be fair, you could say it about positive reinforcement as well. You could say, yes, you're trying to train what you want to train, but it doesn't address the reason why the dog's doing it. And that's true, it doesn't. I'm a big believer in the underlying cause of the behaviour needs addressing, and that is why I'm a behaviourist as opposed to a dog trainer. So I don't train behaviours, I work on the underlying cause and reason for behaviour. My example that I like to give of why punishment is not great for using as a go-to technique is, imagine you're in a restaurant and you've been given a menu, and the menu is like, what would you like? And you say to the waiter, I would like to have the spaghetti bolognese. And he throws water at you and says, no. So you say, okay, wow, I would like to have the lasagna, please. No. And he throws water at you again. And this carries on until you get to item number 6. And then he says, yes, okay, you can have that. And then walks off. You think to yourself, why didn't you just tell me what I could have and what was available to me, first of all, and what you would like me to do, rather than punishing me and throwing water at me and telling me no for everything that I said that was wrong. And that is very much the way that I see dog training, and the way that I like to communicate is I don't like to set people up to get it wrong and punish it, or set dogs up to get it wrong and then punish it. I like to teach them what I want from them, or show them the options available, and then reinforce that. That's my choice. So I hope that's a good example. It's one that I quite like to use because I think it's quite something that we could relate to, and how uncomfortable that would be and how confusing that would be as well. But this brings us on to timing. So timing's super important, whether you're using reinforcement or punishment. No matter the way you train, timing is so important. So bring up my notes for why it's so important. So the next part is about timing and association. So for example, if you recall your dog and they come to you, just say that miracle happened. You called them and they came to you. Oh, hello, Nosy. Bosun's come walked in the room. So you've called your dog and they've come across the field to you, and then you take forever to get your treat out for them. Have you rewarded their recall? So like if it's a toy, or it's a piece of food that you're giving them, or praise, or whatever it is you're giving as your reward for them coming back, if you take 2 minutes to get it out of your bag or to get it ready for them and give it to them, is that rewarding the recall that they just did? Do you think that's still rewarding them for what they did? And the same for if you recall a dog and they come bombing over to you and you ask them to sit. The consequence for coming back to you when you called them was they got asked to sit, not reinforcement. So you have to be very careful with your timing of what you're rewarding. And maybe your sit cue, when you ask your dog to sit, maybe that has a lot of value in it. Maybe the dog loves sitting. I know some dogs who absolutely adore sitting, and it's like the best thing since sliced bread. So if you were to ask them to sit, that would make them feel really good. I'd be, oh yes, brilliant, I'm sitting now, you know, and that's fine if your dog has that association. If you're calling your dog back for a recall in general, and you ask them to sit when they come back, that can be quite punishing to some dogs. And it can actually weaken your recall because they didn't get any reinforcement there. If anything, they got a punishment sometimes. For some dogs don't like sitting at all. And it's very punishing to them to have to sit still, particularly when they're free and outside and, you know, there's everything interesting going on. So you always got to think about what was the consequence for the recall? What was the consequence for what your dog just did? Your timing is important. So whether certainly with reinforcement. So now I want to talk a bit about punishment. Your timing with punishment. Now I have to admit I've never been a punishment-based trainer. So I know there are some dog trainers who have been, they're called crossover trainers, and that's where they used to use e-collars, spray collars, punishment-based things, and they now do not. They now train in a more positive reinforcement manner. And they can certainly speak a lot more so about punishment-based things because they've used it, they've been there, they've seen the results firsthand. I have not. So, but I can certainly, I understand how dogs learn, so I can explain about if your timing was off, say with say you were using a spray collar, for example. So this doesn't shock a dog, it sprays them with water or with lemon zest or something, like citronella. Say for example, you called your dog and they were about to run in the other direction. You called them and they ignored you and you sprayed it. Just in your mind, it was to distract them, it was to interrupt what they were doing so that they would come back. And they happen to look and see a dog or a child or a horse at the same time you sprayed them. How do you know that they're not pairing the spray of the citronella with the appearance of a dog, person, child, horse, whatever you want to put into that? That for me, the fallout of using punishment is much, much higher and much greater than the fallout of using reinforcement. So if you've got your timing wrong with positive reinforcement, you're likely just to end up with a bit of a confused dog, a dog who's not particularly great at cues and commands. Maybe they take a bit longer to do things. They might be a bit porky and chunky because you've been throwing in loads of treats and not really getting anywhere. If you use punishment in the wrong place, the fallout could be huge. I've known dogs who have associated, who have had punishment-based training previously prior to coming to me. We've worked together and they associate a lot of the punishment with things that have passed by, perhaps with dogs, with their owner, and with sounds that they've heard at the same time or sights they've seen at the same time a punishment has happened. So yes, punishment-based training can work, but if the timing of it is wrong or if the dog happens to associate it with something that you are unaware of, you could be causing a huge, huge problem that you're not even aware is actually there. So that for me is why I'm more of a positive reinforcement-based trainer and behaviourist, because that sits better with me, and I know that I'm not doing harm with that. Sure, I could overfeed a dog, yes, but that's probably all I'm going to be guilty of. So yeah, your timing has to be spot on regardless of what you're doing. You need to know what you're reinforcing and you need to know at what moment you're reinforcing. The dog needs to know what is being reinforced at that time. Or like in the example where I said the punishment that I do use is if I was fussing a dog and they were to jump at me and I would take a step back. So therefore the dog does not get the attention anymore. My attention has been taken from them and they didn't get to put their paws all over me either. You know, scent glands in the paws are very, very important to some dogs. They like to put it all over you, particularly in their house. So that could be punishing to that dog, but I'm not applying a punishment. I'm removing myself, and that is punishing to the dog. So it's very interesting. I like to kind of think about it, but you need to have someone who is aware of these things when you're trying to work on behaviour. You need to know what impacts what and what the dog is learning and how they learn if you want to get anywhere. So when I talk about timing as well, so with reinforcement, dogs can, remember in the example of classical conditioning, so with Ivan Pavlov, he paired a bell with food and that created salivating in the dogs and drooling, and they then believe that bell creates salivating. Then they don't believe it just does. So even without the presence of food, he could ring the bell and the dogs would start heavily salivating even with no food. So what that can mean when it comes to timing of positive reinforcement is if you place your hand in your pocket in preparation for rewarding your dog when they see something or when you're ready to recall them, you know as well as I know that your dog knows when your hand's in your pocket and that something's coming. You've only got to lift your hand and go near your pocket and they are there like a shot, being wonderful, because they know something's coming. Or if your dog's reinforcer is toys, you've only got to go near the bag you keep your toy in, or, you know, look like you might be getting it out, and then we're sky high happy, and, you know, the dog's really, really very involved in what you're doing. So what that means is you're pairing with whatever they were doing at that time where your hand went in your pocket, because that is where that reinforcement starts. So you're pairing with whatever they saw, whatever they did, whatever happened in that moment just before your hand, as your hand is going in your pocket or is getting your toy, or you're getting ready to get your toy. That is being reinforced for your dog, not the moment you give them the toy. So this is why cue words are very, very important to use, because they tell the dog that something is coming, whether it be food, whether it be toy, praise, fuss, whatever it, freedom. For some dogs, freedom is their reinforcer. So if you need to make sure that the cue word is there, and that is what means this is coming. So then it doesn't matter if you're fumbling to get it out or you're putting your hand in your pocket, because it was that word at that moment that reinforced them, and that when you've got something coming. So I've got loads of notifications popping up. I'm not sure that if it's to do with this, so I'm just going to refresh my page on my laptop quickly, just in case. I've got comments coming up and I'm not aware of them. So you need to make sure you're rewarding the right thing, and we, as humans in general are terrible for having their hand in their pocket or their hands ready with their valuable thing for their dog prior to the dog even having done anything good worth reinforcing, or prior to the dog seeing, you know, perhaps you've seen a dog, and you know when you see a dog you want to reward your dog. If your hand is already in your pocket, then what will happen is your dog will see your hand and will anticipate food prior to seeing the dog, and that will then mean that it's not the way around you think it is. It's not the dog predicting the food, it's the food predicting the dog, which is troublesome. So I'll tell you about my Springer, Pudge. So a lot of you in this group know of Pudge. So Pudge is the reason I'm a dog behaviour specialist today. And that's because he was a raving little psycho, bless his heart. And he really, for many, many reasons, wasn't great with things. Dogs in particular. So I won't go into the whole story of it, it's not relevant, but he did not like dogs at all. At all. Really horrifically did not like dogs. So what I was told to do by a veterinary specialist at the RVC, who I saw with him, was classical conditioning. So I had no knowledge of this at that time, what that was, but this is the classical conditioning where you pair something with something to get something. So he said when he sees a dog, pair it with squeezy cheese. So your Primula squeezy cheese, and feed him until the dog disappears. And he says, stay out the way, don't go near it, stay out the way, but this is what I want you to do. So I did. What I did not know at that time, and what I accidentally did, was I was getting ready for the squeezy cheesy at the time I saw the dog. So I would see it appear, and then I would get it out and start feeding him. And I wasn't completely certain that he had seen it first. So what happened was the cheese predicted the dog appearing. And I actually managed to make Pudge terrified of squeezy cheese, which if anyone's ever met Pudge, you will know how greedy this little chunker was. He wasn't called Pudge for no reason. He was a fat boy and he loved his food, and he would like bite your arm off of food all the time throughout his entire life. And once I'd realised this a little way down the line of what I'd done, I had said it didn't work. No, it did work. The problem was my timing was off, and what I was doing was it the other way around. It wasn't the dog predicted the cheese, it was the cheese predicted the dog. And he was so terrified of squeezy cheesy that even later on down in his life, say 6 years later, I tried offering him squeezy cheese and he ran away to the other room in the house and he hid from me because it predicted a dog and he didn't want a dog near him. So you do have to be careful which way around you do things, and at what point the dog thinks the reinforcement is coming or the punishment is coming or the whatever is happening. The timing needs to be spot on, and you need to make sure it's being associated with what you're trying to associate it with. So just be very mindful, be aware. It can help to take someone out with you if you're trying to change behaviour on a walk. Have someone go out with you and watch what you do, video what you do and see what your timing's like, because it's very hard to change behaviour if your timing isn't there. So the main thing with any kind of the way dogs learn, whether it be operant conditioning or classical conditioning, none of it takes into account what's going on internally. So intrinsic need and internal reinforcement, none of that's taken into the equation. And that again can be a big fallout. If you're trying to reinforce a behaviour you want to see, but you don't understand why the behaviour is there in the first place, or if you're trying to punish a behaviour because you don't want to see it, but you're not meeting the need of why that behaviour is there, then it's very hard to get anywhere, because that behaviour, that need, that underlying need is still there. That kind of intrinsic requirement is still going on for that dog. So you may not like the behaviour, you may be trying to change it, or you may be trying to increase seeing a behaviour because you like it. But if you don't know why it's there and where it's coming from and what's driving it in the first place, it's very, very difficult again to change it. And it may stop in one way and then appear in another way, because there is still the need underneath that needs to be addressed. So as in the last Geeky chat that I hosted, you know that some behaviours, in fact a lot of behaviours, are due to breed, due to genetic traits, and there's like a self-rewarding system going on that reinforces them for doing these things and that makes them need and desire to do these things. And that happens because of what your dog is. Whether you like it or not, or whether you want that behaviour or not, that is what that dog is. That's what they're for, and it's what's intrinsically rewarding for them. So then you have to work at a different level and have a different understanding of what's going on, because they're born to do it. So if a dog's born to do something, trying to change that is quite something. That's it's not always possible, not always easy, and yeah, like I say, sometimes may not even happen. Depends on what it is you're trying to change or what it is that the dog's doing. A cup of teas, they always go cold because I chat too much. So the next part, which is very relevant, talk about intrinsic reinforcement. I wanted to talk about serotonin and cortisol and dopamine. So anyone who has worked with me will know that I've brought these up to you most likely before, because they will most likely have been playing a part in your dog's behaviour somewhere, or there may be something you need to be aware of to do with that. So they're all huge, they all play a part. So it's well worth knowing about, and this is the last little topic in today's chat. So serotonin, you may or may not have heard of serotonin. It's the key hormone. So it stabilizes mood, it stabilizes happiness, and it impacts the entire body. So again, I've got my notes here because I don't want to miss anything I've written. So serotonin impacts the entire body, and it helps with sleeping, with eating, with digestion, and a lot of body functions. So serotonin deficiency is fairly common, and it can actually be fixed and corrected with dietary change. So quite a lot of people aren't aware that serotonin can be quite a big issue for your dog. You think about the things that it impacts, so sleeping, eating, digestion, their mood, their happiness, that can be diet related if it's not given what it needs. So serotonin, you can also have issues with serotonin. So if your dog has too much serotonin, you get a different set of issues. And there's something called serotonin syndrome as well. So I'm not suggesting that you will go out and try and research how to suddenly increase your dog's serotonin levels, but it may be relevant to your dog and to their life. Maybe something that does need addressing. Cortisol. This is nature's alarm system. So like humans, dogs have it, and vice versa. So we all have cortisol that kind of goes in our body. And it's a natural response to stress, so it keeps you safe. If cortisol isn't released into your body, you don't have a fight and flight system, so you have no way of kind of sensing danger. So dogs are quite They're different to us in the sense that we could logically reason with something, whereas a dog cannot. So if something puts them into their fight and flight system, then it can actually trigger a cortisol release. So you usually get a release of adrenaline and cortisol from the adrenal glands. So when the dog believes they are under threat, or if something is scary, or something makes them jump, or if they're under stress, then you get the adrenaline and cortisol released into the body. So if it's just temporary, if it's just like a startle, you can get a release of them, and then the hormones kind of drop back to normal again. So they just act as the fight and flight needed in that moment, and then after a while they drop back down. And that's quite normal. That's a normal pattern you would expect to see if someone or something was startled or frightened, or temporary things. If a dog is constantly under stress through different things in their life, and stress can look like fear, anxiety, worry, panic. It can look in a lot of different ways. It can look like aggression. But if they're under stress over a prolonged period of time, and stress is a big part of their life, then it's constantly turned on. So they're constantly having the adrenaline and cortisol rush into their body. It's constantly there, and that means they're constantly in the fight and flight system. They're there, and they live in that state, which is quite a hard way of living. It's not very enjoyable. There are different arguments for how long it can take for cortisol to drop out of the body and to go back to a normal level. And so it can be between 3 and 7 days, depending on the level, depending on how stressed they've been and how long they've been at that stage for, and depending on which research papers you read. But between 3 and 7 days can actually be how long it can take for the dog to get out of a fight and flight system. So this can be why you get clusters of behaviour that maybe you don't want to see. Maybe your dog gets spooked by one thing and then spooked by another thing, and then they then have a fearful time, and then they become a bit aggressive, and then they react at something else, and you kind of get these ongoing clusters that happen in waves with each other. And a lot of that is due to cortisol, because it's there keeping them in their fight and flight system as part of their nature's alarm system. So cortisol, they need it. Yes, it's okay to have bits of adrenaline and cortisol rushes. You expect that. That's everyday life. That's normal. That's normal for us. Living in a state of stress for a dog, not normal, not good, and not healthy. And it certainly isn't going to help you change behaviour at all. So you need to get it down to a low, normal level, and then try working on behaviour changing, or training if that's what you're working at. So dopamine, I quite like dopamine. So it's the neurotransmitter for pleasure. So it's a lot of dogs get natural reinforcement from dopamine. They will seek out opportunities to flood their body with dopamine. But it's part of the brain's reward system. So it releases when you do things that feel good for yourself. So we get it, like dogs get it. So when something feels good for you, you get flooded with dopamine, and dopamine makes you feel good. So this, the release of dopamine creates a desire to keep doing it. So that means that the behaviours can become quite addictive and quite enjoyable for the dog, and they're more likely to do them because they get flooded with this dopamine. Breed-specific traits can flood the body with dopamine because it's so intrinsically reinforcing, and because they've got this genetic desire to do these things. It's like a cycle. It's continuous. They have a desire to do it. The dopamine floods them with feel good when they do it, and then they have a desire to keep doing it even more. So very, very, very self-rewarding there. I will bring it up as it's one of the things that I specialise in. Resource guarding is something that I specialise in a lot. And all three of these hormones are incredibly relevant to working on resource guarding. And dopamine is one of the big things in resource guarding, because the dog gets flooded with dopamine every single time they get to resource guard, and they practice and they win and they get it, and they then want to do it, and they seek out opportunities for doing it even more. So quite a lot of dogs are resource guarders because of the hormone effect that it has, as opposed to other things. So again, a bit of a breed specific, well, it is a very, very breed specific trait, resource guarding, but these three hormones I work with quite a lot and talk about quite a lot, because they're just so relevant to changing behaviour and why behaviour happens and what impacts what. So you need to know about what's impacting what, again, if you're trying to change behaviour. So all of these things are so, so relevant. And the things from the Geeky Chat Live one, very relevant too. So that's the end of Geeky Chat 2. So I hope that was helpful for you, and I hope that you've picked out some information in there that may be relevant to your journey with your dog too.